It's more than just lifting and shifting the compute. In fact, why all three elements of networking, security, and the compute really need to be considered from the outset to better ensure the success of your cloud deployments and your cloud migrations. So by background, I came to Fortinet about 5 years ago to help work on strategy and to lift and expand our approach about security, really just getting security right by using 25 years of experience in Fortinet security. So my background is I've been working in this industry for the better part of 25 years. Prior to coming to Fortinet 5 years ago, I spent 16 years at Verizon, where back in 1999, I started as one of the first product managers in security. And from there wrote the original business case for the MSS practice and was part of the leadership team that built that to be the industry's largest managed security services provider. My last 2 years at Verizon, I was a security CTO, where I made technology decisions with regard to security, and my team ran the data breach investigations report. So if you ever read that report, that was my team. And you know, the interesting thing about that report is that across 12,500 data breaches, I consistently saw problems in complexity that were systemic issues in cybersecurity, principally around the lack of visibility and the lack of integration and automation. And that led to situations where misconfigured devices went undetected, where vulnerabilities go undetected and unpatched, where anomalous behavior goes uninvestigated. And that's really why I came to Fortinet, was to try to get those issues corrected and addressed by this Fortinet security fabric. But for today's discussion, we're going to talk about why cloud computing is more than just that lifting and shifting of the computing, if you will. So a little bit of background with regards to Fortinet. So we are a leading pure play cybersecurity company, and our approach is to deliver a broad set of integrated and automated security technologies that are designed to work together to collect and share information to help enhance detection and accelerate mitigation through automation and artificial intelligence. Our approach. $3 billion business right now. Market cap is about $30 billion. For the 20 odd years we've been in business, you know, it's been a great story, highly successful, zero debt, high profit, great growth. Recently, we issued our first bond release, and the market really received that very well. You see that with the tremendous enterprise grade risk rating that we received, and very different than where the market is with other security companies. Well, we have a lower level rating. So that speaks to volumes about what Fortinet is as a trusted partner in security, the fact that we're adopted by over 70% of the Fortune 100 and most governments of the free world, speaks volumes about who we are. You know, the bottom part, you see 50 integrated products. This speaks to the 40 products within the portfolio that really are designed to work together from the outset in a broad and integrated fashion. And the success of that strategy is manifested in the 500,000 customers around the world today. So we are a deeply organically innovative company. And that's one of the reasons why these technologies work out of the box together so well. With over 700 patents, you know, we have more patents in the industry than the competition combined. So in a nutshell, that's who we are. Headquartered in Sunnyvale, California, U.S. publicly traded company. We are in the S&P 500. In fact, we're the only pure play cybersecurity company in the S&P 500. Just north of that in Burnaby, Canada. So we're home, and there we have we're I believe the largest IT employer in the Vancouver area, and that's where we spend a tremendous amount of our investment, about $350 million a year in R&D. In Burnaby in Canada and across into Ottawa as well. So what you see here is a global presence, but local capability across the Americas, EMEA, Southwest Asia, and across the Pacific Rim. 8,000 plus employees. I think we're going to grow to greater than 10,000 in a short period of time, represented by those 500,000 customers equally distributed across geographically, but also from an industry perspective, from segments across SMB, mid-market, and enterprise, public sector, private sector. So that's who we are as a company. With regards to our technology, the analyst community gives us great ratings. I highlight this because it demonstrates both what the analysts are seeing in their research and their testing, but also equally, if not more important, is what your peers, your colleagues across the world are telling folks like Gartner, and Forrester and NSS Labs and others. So I like this slide because it demonstrates domain expertise in two key areas that are foundational to the success of any cloud computing migration. The first part is the enterprise security as manifested in the network firewall space. So we're Gartner Magic Quadrant there. I think it's about 11, 12 straight years there. WAN edge infrastructure, that really represents networking. And the future of enterprise IT networking is gonna be SD-WAN. And the reason that's the case is because of cloud compute. We're going to talk about that. And so across that space, you see the magic quadrants demonstrated in the enterprise space security, in the WAN, SD-WAN capabilities. But as you move down, you also see where we're certainly vendors to be considered when it comes to secure web gateway, indoor location services. Again, networking and security integral as we move forward, but almost as equally important. At the bottom, there are the 6 Gartner market guides. These are the precursors to more formal research. And it shows that, hey, that when you're thinking about security, we are a leader in that space on these more leading edge and more traditional types of security capabilities, whether it's intrusion detection or prevention, email security, network access control, which is foundational to zero trust and zero trust network access, but also on the more leading edge capabilities on operational technologies and 5G enablement and SOAR. And all of these things play key roles when it comes to cloud, because one of the lessons I've learned over the last 25 years is that when you think about the compute, whether it's in our traditional data centers or into public or private clouds, they don't work in isolation. The success of that capability really is dependent upon the integration of both networking, security, and the compute. And all three have to work together in order to deliver outcomes and experiences. And so as part of my job, I get to meet with 400 or 500 companies and their teams every year. And the ones that have been really successful during the pandemic forward are the ones that were able to create new and better ways for their stakeholders to interact with their brands, basically new ways for customers and and partners and employees to access resources and conduct commerce with these organizations. And in doing so, that's how they succeed. You know, I think moving forward, the notion of distributed home work models is going to be here. The notion of distributed computing is going to be here. And these forces are accelerating, and these are manifested in everything from telework, edge computing, the rise of IT and operational technologies on our edges, the complexities of compliance, and the explosion of growth in data being generated on the enterprise edge. All of these things have to be considered within the context of any cloud migration, which is being lifted and shipped, which ones need to be rethought, recoded for container environments. It's really thinking about the cloud as computing within the context of your overall architecture. That's how you avoid those gaps that lead to disruptions and data breaches that I saw so consistently across 12,000 data breaches in the last 25 years. And so as we move forward, the things that your peers are telling me is that, Jonathan, it really comes down to delivering better outcomes and better user experiences. And the two are almost equally important. In fact, most of the CIOs and CISOs I'm meeting with today are saying, hey, look, we're on the traditional ITIL-based KPIs with regards to true, false, positive rates and mean time to detection and mean time to response, mitigation and remediation. What we're really troubled by is how do we measure the ROI on digital experience? How do I demonstrate that for every incremental investment in networking and security, we see a corresponding improvement, not only the business outcome or the mission outcome, and those are pretty standard measurements of agility, accelerated time to market, things like that can be relatively easy to measure. But measuring the impact of network performance, application performance, and security performance as it affects the digital experience, that's the emerging area, and we're going to talk about that. So these are the things you need to consider before going through a cloud migration. What are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? So in addition to those more clearly defined metrics of accelerated time to market, agility, innovation, cost savings, you know, those types of scalability questions, the other things you need to consider about what are you trying to deliver with regards to the digital experience, and what types of improvements are you looking for in terms of business outcomes or mission outcomes, things like response times, for instance. one of the things that I keep hearing about over the last 12 months is that cloud is the new normal. I would just say we've been down this road now for the better part of a decade. And I think cloud is just the normal now. It's just the normal way we go about computing. And we shift over time, but right now, that's just the new normal. Over the last 12 months, the research suggests that, hey, there has been a lot more unexpected demand and spend and investment in public cloud. But at the same time, what we're seeing is the rise of a software-defined enterprise. Increasingly, as our environments become more hybrid, you've got to think about what is the inflection point? Does it make sense for us to own, operate, manage, and monitor our own infrastructure, our own platforms, and our own software licenses? And how do we manage our legacy investments now as we moved into a more shared responsibility model? So any cloud implementation needs to consider to ensure you have the same level of visibility, the same level of control, the same level of resilience moving into an environment where you have shared responsibility, but very limited accountability. So what I've seen over the last 3 years has been this rise of a software-defined enterprise. Companies and public sector organizations that are highly distributed, where their infrastructure is very hybrid between in-house and third-party providers and vendors, where platforms are also equally distributed and software is highly disaggregated. Everything from DevOps to how it's consumed, how it's developed, all are very disaggregated. And how do you ensure that security is embedded in that DevOps process from the beginning rather than bolted on? Because bolted on, as we clearly have demonstrated, doesn't work. And the evidence is replete within that. But at the same time, I will remind us all that the total spend on traditional data centers is declining, but it hasn't gone away. I was on a call just earlier today with some IT folks from government, and they said, look, there is pension data, there is PII data, there's healthcare information, there is intellectual property that will never, ever be put into a public cloud. It will always stay on our prem inside our enterprise perimeter because of regulatory requirements and compliance. Going to be all things moving forward. In fact, the rise of edge computing is the demonstration of that. So at the same time, we all get that moving our computing to multi-cloud or hybrid cloud is something that most organizations are going to deploy. In fact, in my observations over the last 2 years, that's clearly the case. Only about 5, maybe 7% of the companies I've spoken to are all cloud. They tend to be smaller, they tend to be startups. And less than 10% are still all premise-based. I think the vast majority of organizations moving forward, irrespective of whether small, medium, or enterprise, are going to have some level of multi-cloud in a hybrid cloud computing environment. So that does present some benefits. As you move to the cloud and we begin to have dedicated teams who do nothing but provide security around the infrastructure and the platform, you should see a reduction in number of security incidents. That's great. That's been the result of every time we bring in a third party with that dedicated function, because our teams today are just simply overwhelmed by the level of complexity and the volume of work and alerts that they see. So that's great. The bad news is that because of the complexity of that shared responsibility model, that 95% of the security failures are the customer's fault. I will tell you that one of the top 3 issues to be wary about is how do you maintain cross-platform and cross-domain visibility in a shared responsibility model? What is the common platform, the lowest common denominator that ensures that you can understand what's happening on your legacy environment as well as what's happening across multiple clouds that you may host services in? And so on average, in my experience, it takes a person some 9 to 12 months to really understand what shared responsibility is. And then in many ways, these large organizations, as you see, they had failures in their S3 implementations because the fault was open to the internet. I mean, there's simple basic things that get overlooked because of a lack of deep awareness about how things work. Again, who's going to be responsible, who's accountable, who needs to confirm, and who needs to be informed with regards to decisions across this hybrid architecture. And if you think that actually having physical access to devices and logs and everything in-house is troubling and difficult, think about now the communications and management challenges as we begin to bring in multiple parties into our solution sets. And then likewise, the thing that really draws my attention to the fact that we have systemic failures in cybersecurity, despite the $300 billion we'll spend on network security, despite the huge amount of human effort and endeavor that we spend every year on cybersecurity, the fact that 99% of all the vulnerabilities exploited were known for at least a year is very telling. It tells us that we're missing on basics. And I think we're missing on basics because we're not seeing things in visibility because of the complexity of the operating environment. So when you think about adding abstractions in computing, in implementation, in orchestration, really also think about the long-term approach. How am I going to ensure that I have that level of visibility and control? Because you're not going to stay in the same cloud environment forever. You are going to migrate. There will be changes in technologies. There will be changes in business requirements. And so the portability aspects becomes key as well, but also, again, that unified visibility and control. So consider that. Thing I've noticed the attack chain, the kill chain, of course, the models is that, look, over the last 15 months, what we've seen is that the threat actors, be they private or public sector affiliated, nation state affiliated, they use the dark web as a meeting place to bring together resources. And what I've seen is a very effective marketplace to launch attacks. And what we've seen is the acceleration of both automated opportunistic attacks, but also very targeted attacks and campaigns of attacks. And the volume, the velocity, the automation that's being used is the same thing we're using on this side of the fence. And so one of the things that you need to consider is now highly distributed ecosystem to understand what is anomalous, what's malicious, and where on that kill chain can you do the mitigation. The sooner the better. But given the level of sophistication, given the number of entry points, given the level of complexity, in many cases, you may not detect that particular attack or anomalous behavior until the latter part of that kill chain. So what's really needed is the ability to leverage AI in an automated way so that you can detect and mitigate these threats at speed and at scale. Hybrid environments, making sure that you can do that across your legacy as well as your public cloud environments. All pretty big challenges. So what this slide demonstrates is the evolution of where we are as a security industry. So in early 2000s, we thought about security as point defense products, like endpoint security, really just very siloed, if you will, and vendor-centric. Beginning about 2010, we began to see the rise in the evolution from point defense products to security platforms, more consolidated functions. We began to look at content inspection. We began to look at security on a data center, on endpoints and VPNs. We began to see the consolidation of everything from stateful firewall to intrusion detection to antivirus to sandboxing. Beginning now in this time period with cloud security, we see the rise of really the security fabric, what Fortinet coined in 2015 and what Gartner recognized as a strategic technology trend in 2021. Gartner calls it a cybersecurity mesh, but the idea that you really need a set of technologies that are integrated across security and networking to collect and share information to ensure cross-platform, the cross-domain visibility and control, especially as we move into cloud security. So that's why you have that convergence of security and networking to ensure the compute. And that's why it's a very different approach than traditional security. So as you think about your cloud migrations, do you have the ability to support these types of technologies in an efficient form factor, whether it's an appliance, whether it's a VM, whether it's a cloud delivered capability? And then I think moving forward, as we integrate things like zero trust, the importance of identity and access management, and the ability to leverage really good actionable intelligence to do that automated mitigation at speed and at scale is key. And intelligence is great, but my caveat, having run threat research, is that intelligence is only actionable if you have a platform and an infrastructure on which you can apply the intelligence. great timely intelligence that cannot be applied because you have a fragmented architecture with multiple non-integrated technologies with no common denominator, no common platform, connective tissue, if you will, really loses its benefit. And so what we see now is really the evolution of a network, and it's broad, it's far more expanded. This is what we used to see. I think what you see now are a multitude of users on multiple endpoints, mobile devices, lots more IoT and OT nodes, if you will, all attempting to access cloud resources and consume services from clouds from any number of edges, whether it's the LAN edge, the WAN edge, the data center edge, or a cloud edge. And they're all accessing these services on net, off net, travel, you name it. And the key denominator here for network access methodology is going to be SD-WAN. Here, I'll take a moment to discuss this. Your cloud migration is a shift of the compute from your data centers to somebody else's infrastructure, platform, software, et cetera. And what that necessitates now is it begins to question, well, if I'm shifting my compute, what's my access methodology? What's my WAN methodology? It used to be hub and spoke, router-based, MPLS, lease line architecture, where everything was being backhauled back to a centralized data center or data centers, and through a central security stack, and then across into the internet. That's no longer the case now because you've moved the compute. You still have those requirements because you're going to have some resources in your legacy environment, but increasingly you're accessing services directly from these clouds. And therefore you need to have security on that edge, right? But that edge now is supported by SD-WAN, software-defined wide area networks, is going to be the next iteration of enterprise networking, where that's going to be your WAN. And so that's one of the first reasons why cloud computing is more than just lifting and shifting, because you're essentially moving your computing and you're distributing that. And in my experience, networking and security always follows the compute. And so those considerations, as we'll discuss, what are the networking considerations we need to be aware of? What are the security implications of having more distributed computing? And they all need to work in order to get the benefits that you assume will be delivered from this migration to cloud. And so when I speak to companies today, this is the model I give them. Hybrid compute is really going to be the standard. There are going to be lots of legacy data center computing things, data lakes, intellectual property, PII, healthcare information, all types of information that it will never leave that traditional data center. But increasingly, we've migrated and virtualized services into public clouds, that infrastructure platform and software as a service. Where we're moving next, the next iteration of computing is going to be on the edge. We're beginning to see this more and more now as we bring the compute, the processing and the storage of the data emerging today are edge or micro clouds that bring that computing capability closer to where it's being used. And then you have those traditional core clouds. And I was on the phone earlier today with one of the states here in the US that utilizes edge computing and IoT so that they have visibility into their road infrastructure, to optimize the allocation of resources in plowing snow, for instance, to use data analytics, to use that predictive and proactive capability. And so they're leveraging the compute on that edge to optimize those resources, and they're still sending data back to those core clouds. So I think moving forward, we also need to consider how will we support 5G, how will we support IoT and OT and edge computing as part of our cloud strategy. Because edge compute, edge clouds rather than core clouds. This slide represents that evolution that I've seen throughout the last 25 years. Across this span of time, you see these forces of more centralized and more distributed computing. From mainframes in the 80s across personal computers and data centers and multi-cloud to edge compute. And so what Gartner is forecasting is over the next few years that 50% or more of the enterprise data generated will be on that edge, right? And that's up from 20% today. And so your cloud computing strategy also needs to think about how to support the emergence of edge computing. And I think on the right-hand side, in a nutshell, is the complexity we face. The dark blue are the elements that we control. The light blue are the elements of the service provider is going to control. And so I think our org charts are going to look increasingly less hierarchical and be more like a shared responsibility model and a RACI matrix. Why? Because now in our solution sets, those outcomes and experiences are based upon capabilities delivered by technology vendors, by service providers, by cloud platform providers. And the key question here is, as an operator, the accountability stays upon our shoulders. How do we ensure the same level of visibility and control across a very hybrid, highly distributed ecosystem? That's a high order of complexity. The way that I like working with Fortinet technology is that this fabric provides that framework around which you get the same visibility, the same feel and controls, whether you're on-prem, private cloud, public cloud. And that's going to be one of the main requirements for this notion of cross-platform, cross-domain visibility and control. As you think about your cloud strategies, how do you ensure that moving forward? The things that I'm working on today, and what I see is emergence of the next iteration of compute, certainly mobile equipment. We're going to move from being awareness based on telemetry to awareness being based on networked. And the case in point are level 5 fully autonomous vehicles. So cars traveling on a highway are no longer going to communicate with the cloud and have awareness based on telemetry with data from a microcloud. They're going to be networked with each other via 5G technology. And so they need to have security at that level. And I don't mean just cars, but from a perspective, school buses, snow plows, trucks, any connected platform in a smart city, green solutions, all of that's going to be required. That's what we're working on today. On assisted work, this is high volumes of data for any level of training, be it education to manufacturing, augmented reality, for telehealth, for clinical and non-clinical functions, right? You need to have high reliability, highly resilient, low latency types of capabilities to deliver a very rich experience. Those edge data centers, that's where the compute is going to be based moving forward. And all the major carriers are deploying edge clouds right now. So that's what we're supporting as well. The bottom line really talks about those two keywords, autonomous machines and logistics. The two keywords that support this are the notions of proactive and predictive. Using data analytics, right, drive more proactive and predictive maintenance and contracting and business process improvements. What you're trying to do is find bits of data that will lead you to a better operating cycle, a shorter operating interval, more responsive services, all of which drives better outcomes and better experiences. So your cloud computing strategy really needs to think about how you support to optimize things that are going to happen on the edge. And so whether we like it or not, we're about to enter another iteration of computing that adds more layers of complexity, all at the same time with accelerated volumes of data, and much of which will be encrypted as well. And so when we think about cloud, we need to think about the ability to support hyperscale operations. And because a lot of this data will be encrypted. And if you can't support encryption at 5G speeds without degradation of networking and security performance, then there's a bottleneck, and that negates everything we strive for to begin with. So key considerations. Now, whether you choose Fortinet or someone else, this is what I would suggest you question the vendors on when you think about your computing. And OT, from the factory floor to the home office, the branch office, connected vehicles, that is a broad operating environment, edge to edge, LAN and data center cloud. Second, are the foundational technologies, not only your technologies, but the ones that you're partnering with, are they really integrated? How well can you collect and share information to ensure performance at sub-millisecond tolerances? That's the other thing here. As we move into hybrid clouds to support these types of functions and use cases, these processes have very tight tolerance, and the demand for continually enhanced experiences really questions the ability of traditional technologies to process and manage and secure data at sub-millisecond tolerances, right? So that becomes key. And then automation, because you have to be able to leverage automated capabilities so that you can detect, and then mitigate at speed and at scale. So we're talking sub-millisecond response times across an ecosystem that is extremely distributed and indeed very complex with very tight tolerances. And so that's why I think an integrated fabric-based approach is so much better than what we've had in the past. What we've had in the past, ladies and gentlemen, just simply cannot keep pace with the types of sub-millisecond requirements that I'm seeing across operational technologies, across what has to move forward. And so when I'm looking at technology decisions, I'm looking for the ability to have networking and security in a converged manner, most principally a next generation firewall with SD-WAN capabilities. One of the things I like so much about Fortinet is we are the only technology vendor that has an organically developed next generation firewall with SD-WAN capability. And that brings me a tremendous level of comfort that was proven through labbing that the technology works, right? You have that convergence of the two domains there. Trust is going to move forward as well. The more distributed computing, the more hybrid it becomes, the greater the requirement to ensure that only the right users and entities are accessing those applications at the right time. It's in essence this notion of need to know basis for access to any and all resources. And think of that for a moment. Any and all network resources, whether there are on-prem, private cloud, public cloud, in a hybrid environment, you're going to be looking at millions of network access requests from users and entities and trying to discern and ensure only the appropriate access. And then over time, assess that risk. So logging and monitoring everything, huge challenges there. Dynamic cloud security, again, it's a very hybrid environment that we're going to be in. The ability to ensure that you have the same security on an application, on data, on a cloud, any cloud is key. That, I think, is one of the biggest requirements moving forward, the ability to ensure that you have the same look and feel, visibility and control across a very hybrid environment. And then finally, AI-driven operations. There is no way that we're going to address the volume, velocity of data, alerts, that we're going to see in this environment using our traditional approaches. Humans, I think that humans process that much complexity is a very reason why we fail systematically on things like basic security hygiene, why patches go unmitigated or vulnerabilities go unpatched, right? Why misconfigured devices go undetected, or even they are detected, they're left misconfigured. Why anomalous behavior doesn't get detected or investigated, why dwell times for penetrations are in the months, in a couple of cases in the low percentages. I've seen cases where adversaries have dwelled inside of organizations for over a year or more. And that's pretty scary. So what doesn't change over time though, is the focus on confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data. What does change are consumption patterns, form factors, licensing models. Those things do change, but what you need to have is a vendor. Look for a vendor that gives you all those capabilities, unified management, and an open ecosystem. My standard when I look at it, what an open ecosystem is, I judge it by what we do. So 420 different technology vendors in our ecosystem spanning 3,200 products. That's what I'm looking for. And to the degree of which they are integrated, that's the level of complexity and burden that comes off of my shoulders. And so what's key here is flexibility in form factors, consumption models, and approaches, right? These are the types of integrations I spoke to. I'm not going to be so shameless about self-promotion, but I think this is very capability. And if you look, brands are all best-in-class brands. They're brands that you may be using today. The challenge here is I think that the fabric gives you that common platform on which you can manage and orchestrate these types of technologies and do so in a fashion that gives you uniformity of vision and control across that hybrid ecosystem. Hybrid by its nature, what is a common element in a hybrid ecosystem that gives you visibility and control in your compute? The way we look at security-driven technology is that, and these are, I think, table stake requirements, is that one, any edge, LAN, WAN, data center, cloud edge, you've got to protect all of the edges and expanding. I will tell you that my biggest worry as a CISO today would be, do I really understand where all of my network edges are located? Do I really understand what's in my network as opposed to what I believe is in my network? And by the way, that difference is how advanced threat actors work and how SOC analysts work. Security folks on this side of the fence work with the presumption of what we believe to be in the network. The adversary establishes persistence and then control. They understand what's actually in your network, its state, its configuration, its vulnerabilities, and they begin to exploit that. Network, in terms of performance going forward, I think you really do need an ASIC-based approach. The volume, velocity of data moving forward. There are some folks who will tell you there's no such thing as ASICs in the cloud. I would disagree with that. The one part of cloud computing that's contrary to Moore's law is indeed the networking component. The sheer volume of data that's going to be transmitted, if you will, means that the networking costs right now are actually rising. And that's why Google, Amazon, the other big cloud providers spend an inordinate amount of time and money, investment, and energy on ASIC-based accelerated performance. And ASIC-based performance is the heart of one of the reasons why our products work so well. I would also look for that integration of your SD-WAN and your security functions. Consolidate as much on that network edge as possible. Why on earth would you have a security stack, a routing capability, and an SD-WAN controller? Sometimes up to 3, maybe 4 different devices on edge. The whole object of the exercise here is the complexity, right? To lower costs, improve performance. To the bottom part, I would look for AI capabilities to really help address the shortfalls in the human capacity. I would look for tools and automation that are AI-based that can demonstrate the equivalency of at least 3 to 5 human equivalents. That delivers better performance. That begins to deliver cost savings in the hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. And then I would also look for the ability to give me measurements around digital experience. So think about your security platform so that it can actually monitor networking performance, latency, jitter, things like that, availability, measure event and incident data for security, and look at application performance, and then correlate that against things like response times, clicks and view throughs, completed transactions, and revenue. That begins to give the operator the ability to communicate how are my IT investments in networking and security and compute generating better business outcomes and better end user experiences. Those are the key elements I'm looking for. And the practical reality is that there's not a lot of that out there. So now I want to address some of the key aspects when we think about cloud computing. How are we going to ensure access around that, right? So this is fundamental, I think, moving forward. Zero trust has been a buzzword now for the better part of really 18 months, but the practical reality is that zero trust was invented by a gentleman named John Kinderbeck back in 2009 when he was a Forrester analyst. And I remember speaking with him back in Verizon and talking about how do we ensure least privileged access or need to know basis of access for everything and everyone on the network, understanding the request for network access. That is the essence of zero trust. And zero trust really gained prominence this year because the idea that you shouldn't trust anyone behind the enterprise perimeter any more than anyone outside that perimeter really became a relevant issue when 96% or more of us were working outside that enterprise perimeter. So zero trust, I think, along with SD-WAN, are going to be big issues and foundational moving forward. And I'll stop there for a moment because think about this. The shifting of the compute to include both on-prem, public clouds, and private clouds on-prem shifts the networking and the security, right? And so moving forward, the big macro trends I think you have to consider as part of your computing strategy. Maybe one, zero trust, because we're accessing resources from outside the traditional enterprise perimeter, and we're located outside that perimeter. SD-WAN, because as we shift computing off of our infrastructure to somebody else's, we're also going to need to shift our network architecture, and we're going to go from hub and spoke architectures to more software-defined wide area networks that will become that need. So we're no longer routing traffic back to a centralized security stack. So how do we provide security on those new edges? Those, I think, are going to be the key additional considerations to your cloud compute that are often underappreciated in that initial discussion about moving to cloud services. One of the things I stress is this evolution of end user endpoint access around zero trust. I think that our notions of VPNs need to be multi-factor, and we need to ensure that the endpoint is protected, because the endpoint is in many ways a new that endpoint be provided BYOD type device. On the user security aspect, this is a key element here. If you move to the far right there under FIDO to passwordless authentication, FIDO stands for Fast Identity Online 2.0. And I think that this is an often underappreciated aspect of your cloud. You're moving to the cloud to create better outcomes and experiences. The number one roadblock to that today for any contactless commerce initiative, public sector, private sector, irrespective, is authentication. Authentication and the need to manage and learn and maintain passwords is entirely archaic. I will tell you that the folks at NIST, when they wrote the strong password requirements, have said that passwords today are essentially an obsolete approach, and that we really need to embrace multi-factor authentication. But automated authentication without passwords on a FIDO2 approach, and the ability to federate that means that as a user with a form factor like a phone, you can authenticate and gain access to a network ecosystem, not only to the right resources, and it makes security seamless. And so think also about, in terms of your cloud compute, does it support a passwordless authentication? That's one of the things I'm working on. It's something I think is often underappreciated, and it becomes a pain point. And if it's addressed up front, I think you can leverage a tremendous amount of productivity gains on that as well. And likewise on endpoint security, the ability to access services from endpoints is remote working as a standard business. The key there is to use behavioral-based detection, whether on net and off net, because that endpoint is going to be the entree into the larger enterprise. All right. As you move forward, zero trust in your cloud computing strategy, this comes from the NIST guidelines. It talks about a policy engine decision and enforcement point, basically a platform that sits in the middle of pre-connect and post-connect that takes in feeds and alerts and decide the request, the risk associated with each request, and what to do with that. I think this is key. This is how you ensure the success of your cloud implementation as well. I would hearken that as you go through this, you need to be able to support a number of form factors, and you need to be able to support this from endpoint and from any edge, and so that you have a per application ability of assigning access. And the way I look at it is this. If I were selecting a product today, I would look at something like our Fortinet capability, which sits in the middle and has the ability to ingest a multitude of different vendors. Some are competitors on pre-connect and post-connect. And this gives you the ability to provide limited, guarded, unlimited access from multiple locations into your clouds. As well. One of the a lot of folks have been talking about is SASE, this notion of secure access service edges. And this is a term that was coined by Gartner with the idea that as you now have more and more edges, which are not routing traffic back to a centralized security stack, how do you provide security on these new edges, these home offices, branch offices, connected platforms that are connecting directly with cloud resources? And the elements that they speak to, fully agree here, the ability to implement zero trust network access, the ability to offer SD-WAN, and then firewalls as a service, secure web gateways as a service, and CASB. These are the foundational elements around providing security, not only to that edge, but on that edge. And I say that because not everybody's cloud journey is going to be the same. Not everybody's resources are going to be the same. In some cases, it makes better sense to deliver these capabilities via an appliance. In some cases, it makes better sense to deliver these services via VM. In other cases, it makes these services better to be delivered from a cloud, right? So the way that we approach it is that Fortinet provides these form factors, appliance, VM, or cloud, to deliver these capabilities. This really begins to ensure that you can access securely those cloud resources. And again, it points to the need to have networking, security, and your cloud compute working in unison to deliver outcomes and experiences. Again, just more demonstration why, there's a lot more to just considering whether you can lift and shift or whether you have to write new code to move things or implement things in the cloud. So when you think about security, you need to be able to deliver a number of capabilities across your private clouds and data centers, your public cloud, and your software as a service. Look for capabilities at the network layer, at the platform layer, and at the application layer, and the ability for a vendor to demonstrate the level of integration across this so that you get, a very secure and optimized on-ramp to the cloud from these edges in the form of secure SD-WAN. Once you're delivering those capabilities into a SASE-like platform or framework, the ability to offer load balancing, to offer cloud access security brokers so that you can understand who is accessing what in the cloud, what they're doing, and the final disposition of what was accessed. Also container security. And then accordingly at the application layer, those traditional types of security capabilities. And the fewer layers, the fewer vendors, the fewer levels of complexity, the better your success is going to be. And likewise here, when it comes to enabling a resilient cloud, I think SD-WAN is optimized that, because you look here, you see that awareness, and that's sort of continuous learning to understand different applications so that you can ensure that as access, from those edges, those branch offices to public clouds, to your on-premise environment, to your SaaS services, right? And our ability right now to support over 5,000 different applications and continually expand upon that gets you to this notion of real-time optimization, because you're leveraging the integrated and connective capabilities of that fabric across this distributed ecosystem so that you can implement predictive and proactive capabilities, and therefore you get to that self-healing capability. I remember serving on Cisco's advisory board back in the day when Cisco was talking about a self-defending network, and we thought that was pie in the sky. But now I'm really beginning to see those capabilities now manifested in things like that Fortinet security fabric, the ability to collect and share tremendous volumes of data to make semi and fully autonomous decisions for a self-defending network that is application aware around criticality. And so that ensures performance and resilience across networking, security, and your cloud to get those outcomes and experiences. So I think that's a huge differentiator. Really, really think about those three elements working together and how do they overcome those disruptions that are so inherent across that. And then likewise, this is for your consideration. These are the types of checkboxes I look for when it comes to a single pane of glass. I won't spend time here. You'll get these things, right? And I see that we're going to get to the Q&A session in just about 5 minutes. And so I'm going to wrap this up and then we'll address the questions. So appreciate your patience there. Again, a unified dashboard. This is one of the principal challenges of why security teams fail, because they don't have cross-platform, cross-domain visibility. I will tell you the dirty secret about security. Multiple management consoles, alerts. You're essentially swivel chairing, unless you have some automation capabilities that unifies them all. But swivel chairing is not an effective way of managing security across a very hybrid environment. So look for not only a platform, but a way they present the data to you in a NOC/SOC dashboard, unified network and security operations, so that you can understand network performance, application performance, and security performance. And that really gets to something that we have in our management consoles, but also in a product we call FortiMonitor, which is a digital experience monitoring SaaS platform that gives teams the ability to understand how network performance, application performance, and security performance really experience. These are all native integrations that I think are kind of table stakes, right? So use this as a baseline for comparison across the different vendors. I think we stack up pretty well, but if I were looking at a long-term cloud strategy, I would be looking at robust capabilities across at least the 6 largest public cloud providers in the marketplace today, and how deeply integrated your vendor might be. FortiMonitor I spoke to, so I won't take that. The last thing I would say from a cloud and security performance side of the house is, every leadership team wants to have a dashboard and visibility into where am I today? What is my current state relative to my desired state? How am I operating against my, where am I trending? These reports in a typical stoplight fashion. Hopefully you're green, but better yellow trending green than red trending yellow. And so take a look at this capability and baseline it against what the marketplace has. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. If I were back in an operational role today, this is what I would deploy. This is the type of visibility that I need to present to my leadership team on demand. Where am I with regards to best and practices controls, my maturity model, how relative am I into configuration checks? Again, misconfigured devices, in my experience, in the aftermath of data breaches, I found 40% of firewall rules to be completely irrelevant. And I found almost a similar number of devices that were misconfigured. Misconfigured devices, missing patches, those are the things that lead to larger cascading security failures. And so this gives me an ability to deliver a metric and understanding over time. So with that, I'm going to close it now, this presentation, and open it up for Q&A. So the first question is, okay, the first question was the cloud and the normal start time doesn't make sense. I think it's because it's cumulative. It's not a zero-sum game. You're gonna see some companies that have a mixture. So that's why I believe that answer doesn't jive up to you. I hope that answers it. Otherwise, we can go offline and we can address it there. I'll start off by just addressing some of the basic questions I always get asked. And the first one is zero trust, what's the best way or easiest way to begin my zero trust implementation for a multi-cloud infrastructure? And I will tell you that the most important thing about zero trust and your migration to cloud is to first do your data and process classification, to really understand what's the data, what type of data do I have, where does it reside, what is its criticality level, who is the owner, what are the underlying processes and dependencies, what are the SLAs associated with those data and those processes and those criticalities. Understanding that really helps you measure out in your steps which applications, which workloads can be and should be migrated to a cloud implementation. But more importantly, it allows you to understand who your critical users are, the level of access privileges that they have. I would tell you, in my experience in conversations with some APTs from the intelligence community, they said, look, Jonathan, we hunt networks. And once we're inside networks, we hunt sysadmins because they have the keys to the kingdom. So if you want to defend against someone like me, and they're basically the folks from various intel agencies, you've got to hunt your sysadmins. You've got to monitor the behavior of anyone or anything that has elevated access privileges. But given the level of complexity and in a hybrid environment of cloud computing and all the new users, partners, suppliers, as well as things that are connected now, these entities, it's really important to see what new ones are being added and what new privileges are being given to these folks, because there are things that don't change, right? Once an adversary penetrates and compromises a network, and from there tries to attempt lateral movement, it's all about leveraging access privileges. And there are things that you can do to monitor to ensure that you detect those things. That's why it's so important to have visibility on all of these network edges. Where networks and subnetworks come together is the key element of creating visibility. And if you can do it there, then you have this sort of cross-platform and cross-domain visibility that is so needed to ensure that end-to-end performance. So zero trust starts off with understanding that. You don't need to do it for everything and everyone at the same time, but you do need to ensure that your critical users and your critical data and processes are understood and they're monitored. And I would do that as an iterative approach over time until you feel that you have enough capacity throughout that environment. Second, as you think about your cloud migration, I would also say, think about the end state. Think about portability. Think about how readily available are the capabilities to help you ensure that your data indeed has been migrated off of that cloud and that the metadata has been destroyed. I think just from GDPR and privacy compliance requirements, those elements become pretty key. So let me see, going through here. All right, I'm not seeing, you know what, I think I will turn it back over to the moderator. I want to thank you for your time today. If there are any additional questions or you just want to have a conversation, offline, I'm always available on LinkedIn. You can find me there and we can have this discussion. Again, many thanks for your time and have a great day.